Hi and welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 14 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. So, lovely listener, what if you decided you would only sew with only second-hand fabric? No trips to the fabric shop, no online fabric shopping, only thrifting and receiving donations to fuel your passion. Assuming that's not what you do already, do you think it would feel frustrating? Perhaps it would unlock some inner creativity and resourcefulness. Today's episode features a conversation that I had with space scientist and passionate maker, Rachel Kirby. Rachel sews almost exclusively within this limitation and shared all about how and why it works for her. Take a listen and see if it's something that you could do, or do more of at least. So are you doing all right? I'm good. I've been inspired by last week's episode with Shams and by some of the projects made by today's guest, Rachel. And this week I've been doing some sewing for my trip to the Netherlands next month. I've made a couple of wash bags to keep our toiletries in out of some waterproof vinyl fabric from my stash. Plus, I have plans to make a wallet to keep our passports in, a smaller purse to take my money in rather than my usual massive purse, which is stuffed with coffee shop loyalty cards and library cards and stuff. And I might have a bash at making a couple of cases for my kids to keep their tablets in if we decide to bring those with us on our trip. Were you inspired by last week's episode to make anything for a forthcoming trip? If so, do share. I'd love to see. In response to last week's episode, which, let me remind you, was all about sustainability as it relates to travel and things that we can make to make our lives easier when we're on our trips, I had a wonderful message from a listener named Peggy. Peggy has travelled to lots of interesting places and has made some awesome and inventive items to take with her. She's made a cord roll for her tech with a zip pouch that snaps on and off, an insulated curling iron case that allows her to pack it up whilst it's still warm, a jewellery roll with pockets, a little drawstring makeup bag that opens flat like a Lego mat but smaller, and finally, and possibly most ingeniously, she's made an infinity scarf that has its ends fastened together with snaps, so you can take it off and open it up and use it like a light blanket. Honestly, I can imagine that being such a useful item for all sorts of other situations as well, especially if you have kids. You could use it as a makeshift picnic blanket when your kid is being weird about sitting on the grass, an emergency towel when they fall into a puddle, an emergency changing mat if there's a nappy emergency, or even to wipe down a damp swing seat or a bench in the park. Thanks so much for Peggy for sharing these awesome ideas. Do you have any sustainability wins this week to declare? There were a couple of days this week when it wasn't freezing or raining, and I took the opportunity to sow some seeds in pots for this year's food growing attempts. Last year, my goal was to try and grow a really wide range of different foods, to try and have a big variety of things to eat. That approach was largely a bust, thanks to the massive snail population in our tiny garden. So this year, I'm scaling back the range of items and only focusing on stuff that I'm pretty sure the snails won't devour. So this week, I planted chard seeds and 4 different types of tomatoes, all from seeds saved locally. I've had great success with chard and tomatoes previously, so hopefully I'll be self-sufficient in those for a while at least at some point this year. No new sign-ups to Patreon to thank this week. However, massive thanks to existing patron Moira, who very kindly upped their amount of support, which is so wonderful. This podcast receives no other funding at all to keep it going. It is solely supported by kind and generous listeners. If you feel you could be one of those glorious souls, please click on the Patreon link that will be showing on your podcast app right now below the description for this episode. It will take you to the Patreon page where you can sign up super quick for whatever amount makes sense to you. Thank you. Okay, thanks for your patience with this long intro today. Remember, full illustrated show notes including links for this and every episode can be found at checkyourthread.com. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for giving me some of your evening.
It's an absolute pleasure.
It's 9:30 in the morning where I am. It's 8:30 where you are.
Yes,
normally
it
by
is.
8:30 in the evening, my brain is mush. How are you still talking?
Yeah, no, it's all good. I kind of come to life a little bit once the kids go to bed,
Oh,
to be honest.
really?
I think my mushiest time is like those 20 minutes before bedtime. And then as the kids go down, I kind of get that surge of energy and creativity comes back to me.
This is my time.
Yeah, exactly. And this is when I usually sew and knit and things. So,
Nice.
yeah.
So let's start in the traditional way, if you wouldn't mind. Can you please tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
My name is Rachel Kirby and I'm in Canberra, Australia. And I am a PhD student, so that fills about half my days. The other half is I'm also the primary carer for 2 young children. And in little bits of pockets of time here and there, I enjoy knitting and sewing.
Amazing. So what's your PhD in?
My PhD is in planetary geology and cosmochemistry. So basically, I am a geologist who doesn't look at rocks from the Earth. I look at rocks from space, so meteorites. And the best way to put it is how a 3-year-old once approached me and said, "Do you cut up shooting stars to see what's inside?" And yeah, that's what I do.
That's very, very cool. So you have a website, and your Instagram handle is both kind of dedicated to your 2 loves in a way, isn't it? Or 2 of your many loves, no doubt, fibre and space. So what came first?
Oh, that's a hard one, really. I think it's probably space because that evolved from geology.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's been little bits of fibre in my life story throughout as well. So I guess they kind of wove together, but as I've gotten older, they've kind of, I guess I've more solidified and ended up on fibre and space being my 2 main things in life. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm really interested in like how those two, I mean, because in some senses you can see that they're very, very different, but for you found ways to kind of combine them in a way, haven't you? So for example, you've designed an amazing jumper that you've knitted the solar system in. Tell us about that and what kind of reaction has that had?
Yeah, that was actually totally insane. So I designed, as you said, a solar system jumper. The actual reason I designed that was I wanted to design a jumper based on my PhD project.
I love that.
But because I've never designed anything before, I was really worried about knitting and taking all this time to make my thesis jumper and then it wouldn't fit. So what I did is my solar system jumper was just a practice.
What?
I was like, if I need to, I know. Well, it's like a toile in a way.
It's so detailed. I can't believe that was...
Yeah. Well, the thing is so I was like, I have to work out how many stitches across I need and all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't want to just knit something one colour. I might as well put something fun on the pattern. So I was like, I could do the solar system. And so I knit that. I did a lot of it when we all had COVID and were locked inside for a while because we had a couple of weeks of isolation. So that was a great thing when I was kind of flat out on the couch. I made it and then I posted it to my Instagram and it got quite a good welcome there. But then I was like, a couple of days later, I was like, this kind of actually intersects with my Twitter. Because I had kept Twitter entirely professional up until that point.
Yeah.
So just retweets of papers, engaging with the research community. I'm like, well, this is my research. I'm a space scientist. So I was like, okay, I'll tweet it. And it just went absolutely insane. I ended up on like a double-page spread of our city newspaper, the Canberra Times. I had multiple like radio and media interviews and articles.
Really?
Yeah, because it went viral. It was such a surprise. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I guess maybe I can bring some of my creative stuff to my professional side.
Yeah. What do you think that was what triggered so many people's imagination about it? It is 2 relatively disparate spheres. What was it that people were so intrigued about?
I think that, but I think also because I think a lot of the sewing and knitting community, at least that I've come across, is mostly on Instagram. And that's where I do most of my engagement with that community. But I think that doesn't mean that people who aren't sewers and knitters can't be inspired and engage with creative ways of expressing ideas. And I think that's what did it. It was actually engaging a completely different audience.
That's such a nice way of thinking about it. It's true. I mean, everyone wears clothes, for example, doesn't it? Everybody has interaction with textiles on the daily.
100%. And yeah, as you say, like everyone has a fashion. Like people might say I'm unfashionable, but you choose your clothes. Everyone makes those decisions. Some people put a lot more thought into those decisions and a lot more sort of value in those decisions, but it doesn't mean that those decisions aren't there. And I think it was actually just engaging different communities that made it really popular. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. That's so cool. I looked at some of the articles via your website and I was like, oh, that's so good. And you got a beautiful photo shoot as well. Those photos look gorgeous.
Yeah, I know. I was like, excellent, because I was actually doing a social media for academics course at the same time. Through the university, and they were like, oh, you should, probably set up a website, because one of the issues we have with academia is we often are moving from institution to institution.
Sure. Yes, you've got a profile on one website and then it goes and...
Yeah, exactly, and it just disappears. So it's easier. So they were like, we really recommend you set up a personal website as a landing spot for people to go. And because Twitter had just happened, I was like, I can probably be a bit brave here and kind of show who I am, because I love science, but also I really love textile arts, and it lights me up, and I find it such an amazing outlet and a place to be creative. But I was always very concerned, especially being a female in a physical science, we're very underrepresented. So I generally felt like I had to present in a way that was more along the status quo. So it didn't have as much of, textile arts being a traditionally female art form, and even, to be honest, often not considered arts, often considered crafts, but I like to call it an art because I think it is an art. Then doing that and realizing that I can actually have a really positive response and reception, it made me realize I actually can bring who I am to my science. And in an interesting way, it opened up lots of doors, because now, I'm coming to the end of my PhD and I need to start thinking about next steps. So I've started organising meetings with people from other places. And I recently contacted one academic and he was like, oh, I remember your jumper.
It's your calling card.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like I was completely coming out of the blue as a PhD student.
You're clearly more memorable.
Yeah, exactly. They knew a bit about my research and I was already a person to them. So it's actually been a really positive thing, even though I was really anxious about it to begin with. So, yeah.
That's such an interesting point that I'd never thought, because I work in predominantly female environment. So I hadn't thought about that aspect of the feminist aspect of presentation of self and trying to conform or fit in to certain criteria of a more traditionally male-dominated industry. But that is so lovely to see that it has been so well received, and that, maybe everybody should be showing a little bit more about themselves. Maybe that is something that you're going to be helping to push forward, possibly within science.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that idea of people just bringing a little bit of who they are. I feel like it makes space for others to come in, because they see themselves, they see that you can be an individual, and then it allows hopefully more women and girls and other people from diverse backgrounds to come into, as I said, a very white male dominated field, especially geology. Some of the physical sciences are very much that way.
I love that. That's so cool. With your making, you use predominantly reused or like second-hand materials. Is that right?
Yes.
Confirmed.
Yes, definitely.
We're on the right track.
Yeah.
So, in fact, is it true that you've only ever bought 4 lengths of new fabric?
I think it might be 5.
Whoa, stop.
I know.
Slow down.
I know. 1 for me and 4 for my children.
That's wild.
Yeah, so when I only started sewing garments in 2019.
Right, wow.
So 4 years ago, I just had my second kid and I was super frustrated with the awful, awful breastfeeding options of clothes. And I was like, I just want to wear a dress.
Yeah, because you basically give up dresses for like however long, don't you?
Yeah, I know, and it was hot. It was a really hot summer here in Australia. So the first week of his life, almost every day was above 40. It was just, I know, and we lived in a rental without air conditioning.
Oh, man.
It was like, could only get it down to 35 with like, as best we could. It was just hot. So I was basically living in those like really daggy breastfeeding singlets that clip up and have like the included bra and everything. And I didn't feel myself.
Yeah.
And that's when I started being like, I could probably sew something for myself. And I just discovered the online knitting community through Instagram. And one of those accounts, it's Pippi Eve, I think it is.
Right.
And she also sews. And she had shown that she'd picked up some lengths of fabric from a charity shop. She's in the UK, and had sewn a couple of skirts. And I was like, oh, I think I could do that. So I was like, I went to our local charity shop and I did the exact same pattern. It was a free pattern at the time. I think it's now $2. The Justine skirt by Ready to Sew.
Yes, I know it.
So very, very basic. But it's, it's a very classic 2 big rectangles with a waistband sort of deal. And it was also good because being postpartum, I didn't fit any of my clothes, so I needed something bigger to be able to fit my changed body. So I thought I'll just give this a go. It's a free pattern, charity shop fabric. This aligns with what I like. So I gave that a go and I really enjoyed it, and it just kind of gradually evolved from there. But then my kids, I was like, I could probably sew things for my kids. And that's why I bought a few new lengths of fabric, because I was like, I wanted, fun, those quilting cottons you get or poplins you get from the big box stores. So I got a couple of dinosaurs and a couple of space prints. But I haven't since then. And then I got a voucher one year for my birthday. So I bought one length of fabric for myself.
Is that the Aranite pattern?
Yeah, the Aranite pants.
So you started sewing straight after you'd had your second child?
Yeah, I was a bit crazy. I knew how to use a machine.
Right.
So in Australia, we all do, well, at least at my school, everyone does sewing. So even my husband knows how to use a sewing machine.
Awesome.
It's just something we have to do in year 7 or 8.
Good.
So early high school. So I knew how to use a sewing machine. My mum had a sewing machine growing up. My gran was an exceptional quilter and also did a little bit of garment sewing. She also knitted. And my other grandma did a lot of crochet. I knew my way around machine. I had my mum's old faff from like the 1980s or something, and big old mechanical heavy metal thing, but it was great. Perfect. Went forward and backwards, did a zigzag. I didn't know how to use the buttonhole feature or if there even was one on that old machine. So because I chose a pattern to start off with lots of buttonholes, I ended up doing lots of very tight zigzags back and forward because I didn't know what else to do, and then just kind of cutting in. And then a
zigzag at the bottom and up the other side.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a bit dodgy looking, but it worked. Yeah, I just muddled through. I'm kind of one of those haphazard sewers who is just like, I think I could probably do that, and just try.
But I'm so fascinated that you clearly decided from the beginning that using secondhand materials was the way that you wanted to approach this, because I mean, so many people, when they start getting into sewing and they start making stuff for their kids, they go bananas and buy loads of bits of fabric, and often it's a fabric that kind of fuels your passion as well, didn't it? So I'm really interested in you making that decision from the very beginning, and what did it mean to you? Like, why did you decide to do that?
I already purchase most of my things secondhand as much as possible, or receive them free secondhand. So whether money or goods were exchanged or not. So I think it was just natural for me. We were both students when I fell pregnant with my first child. So my husband has his PhD as well, and I was in the first year of my PhD. So we already kind of expected to not have money. and we've both been very forwards in the environmental movement at university. We're not so much active on the activist front anymore, but we try and make sure that we live our lives as much as we can by those ethics, if that makes sense.
Is there a link to that and your science background?
I think so. I think that you can't be an environmental earth scientist. So, geology these days is often being called earth sciences instead. But you learn about the earth system and you learn about the planet and other planets and things. And with that knowledge, you can't help but want to be protective of it. You know, it's a beautiful thing. And I apply the same with my children. So when I talk to my children about environmental stuff, I think one of the most effective ways we can make people really interested in protecting the environment is make them love the environment. We choose not to present all the issues to our children. We, let them in on some things.
They're very young as well, aren't they?
They're very young. They're 6 and 4. So they are aware of some things because my 6-year-old is like, why are we vegetarian? All that kind of thing. So there has been some discussions, and some discussions, they'll ask for particular snacks that they see other kids have at school that are all plastic wrapped, but we choose to have no packaging for their lunches and things. So it was already a big part of our lives. So moving into sewing, it was just natural for me to be like, well, I get everything else secondhand. Why don't I just get fabric secondhand?
Yeah.
And notions and stuff. And my machines are all secondhand. Most of my tools are secondhand. Like it was very natural. So yeah, I just didn't have that appeal. And also it's really expensive buying fabric. So there's also that, as I said, sustainability, like personal sustainability, financial sustainability.
True, especially if you're used to being a poor student.
Yeah. So it's sustainability, financially, environmentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I love it. I find that using secondhand fabrics and notions forces me to be much more creative. And I get a lot more joy from that than I do from, I guess, thinking of a pattern and wanting to find the perfect fabric.
Completely. I think I had a similar conversation, or a conversation on a similar topic when I was speaking to a previous guest, Judy Willamette-Ross. I don't know whether you heard this.
The New Zealander? Yeah. Yes, she was amazing. I love that episode.
Yeah, and she was talking about this sense of when you impose restrictions and rules to yourself, that can, I guess for some, might feel a bit like, oh, I'm trapped. But for her, she really found that there was a lot of creativity and it really pushed a kind of sense of resourcefulness. Yeah, and it kind of lit her up in a way. Is that something that you find then?
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of like, have you ever gone to buy toothpaste and being like, what the hell toothpaste do I buy?
Yeah, there's 70.
It's just like a bit, exactly, it's a bit overwhelming. And I feel like that's like a common thing. And I find that by going fabric first instead of pattern first or garment first, you have those constraints which then help bring it under control a little bit. But then also your brain just starts going. You see this length. With secondhand fabric, you don't get to choose how long it is.
Absolutely.
You don't get to choose the color or the content. I just grab stuff when I see it if I think it's something I might use. And usually my brain starts going as soon as I see something about what pattern it could be and what this could become.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't and I'm just drawn to the fabric. But having that constraint, then yes, as Judy said, it really forces you to bring your creativity to make within these defined fields something that you want to use, to wear, to enjoy. And I really love that. I really love that aspect of it. I find it much more exciting than the idea of a fabric store.
Yeah, you have to take the materials and almost kind of, without sounding too fanciful, but almost ask it what it wants to be in a way, don't you? Because you don't...
No, definitely.
You don't go, right, okay, I need 3 meters something because I've seen that pattern, I love it.
Yeah.
But having said that, like when I see your Instagram feed, it seems so cohesive. It seems that you have a really well-defined sense of style. I mean, if you didn't read the captions of your pictures, I don't think anyone would guess that the vast majority of those items came from secondhand materials.
Sheets.
I mean, I guess when I imagine what a wardrobe would look like solely made from secondhand materials, I'd imagine it to be a little bit more random than yours looks. So how have you managed to?
How?
I mean, presumably there are some constraints, or there are some, you have to be a little bit more, what's the word? Almost forgiving, like you have to let some things go, like maybe you haven't got exactly the right color or exactly the right fiber. I'm sure it's not exactly, but how are you able to create such a cohesive look, but it's from different sources?
That's a really interesting question, because I think there's a few things. So you do have to let some things go. Like sometimes I add random seams by just having to patch pieces together.
Interesting.
Like one of the Gilbert tops I made has a back panel.
Yeah.
like a 3 centimeter panel across the back.
Yeah.
But that's fine. It kind of works.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever feel like I have to be forgiving, because apart from maybe in my cutting and patching, because I didn't have an idea to begin with, I'm not giving up on anything.
Ah, that's a good point.
Because I'm being led by the fabric. So it's not like, this is just a bit the wrong colour, because there wasn't a right colour, because it was led by the fabric. It wasn't led by the pattern.
Interesting.
So
that's so interesting.
Yeah, because it is fabric first. There isn't a wrong, and it's just really led by the fabric. In terms of cohesiveness, I think sewing has really helped me determine my style.
Right.
And I think I was a bit more chaotic pre my own sewing.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, it was a bit. But also, I was in my early 20s and just...
There's that as well.
Yeah, like everyone's a bit chaotic then, I think. There's a few amazingly put together people,
Yeah,
but
I don't
that was
trust those people.
not me. Yeah. I feel like, reaching my late 20s, early 30s, I've now kind of developed my own style. I think for me, there's been finding a few base patterns I really like.
So what are your base patterns? What do you have?
I have made so many hinterland dresses, but I love it because I can change, there's sleeve options, sleeveless, button plackets.
Yeah, there's loads of variations in that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So I've taken the buttons off completely and used the top to embroider a pattern across, that sort of thing. I love the Gilbert top. And
Yanta overalls. You've got a number of those.
Yanta overalls. Yeah, I've got 4 of those. I think that helps with cohesiveness, because you just end up with like a lot of the same sort of things, but also knowing my colours, which colours I am drawn to, helps with the cohesiveness.
Yeah. I saw you made some Yanta overalls and you dyed the fabric. So that's a really good point as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I had a light grey fabric, which would just make me look so washed out. Really not my colours, but I was like, I don't want to go out and buy fabric.
Yeah.
I can just go out and buy the dye. So that's the first time I've actually dyed fabric using fabric dye instead of natural dyes. So that was a bit of an experiment, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a really good way to help use those fabrics that already exist. Yes, it's an extra new thing, but I think it's a lot less impact than a new length of fabric.
Sure, especially if that other length is still going to sit there.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, because it was already secondhand. Yeah.
So first of all, in the sense of restriction, so I think so many of us have been so used to sewing, as in like, I picked a pattern that I like and I've seen how much fabric I need to buy, then I go and buy the fabric, then I make the thing. But because you've never worked that way, or predominantly haven't worked that way, you don't feel a sense of restriction because you're not used to it, I guess. So, you're not used to like going, oh, well, I couldn't make that for you. I had, because you're like, oh, well, what can I make? There's a sense of opportunity there with each item.
Yeah, definitely.
So for those of us who are more used to the more traditional way of like, I buy a pattern, I buy the fabric, and we would perhaps like to source more of our fabrics and materials secondhand, but maybe we're a little bit nervous of that sense of restriction bringing in like a loss of enjoyment, possibly, because I mean most of us are sewing because we enjoy the process, and it's a pastime, it's a hobby, it's an enjoyable thing that happens to clothe us. And very few of us, I guess I'm making assumptions here, but the people that listen to this podcast are not sewing because it's their only source of clothing or their only option for clothing.
No.
So it is like a fun thing.
Yes.
So I guess some people might fear a loss of some of that enjoyment. So how would you help people to reframe that then? Or what would you say to people to encourage them having a go?
I don't think you have to do everything secondhand. I think that's a really important thing, because I think as soon as you put your full restrictions on something, that's when it does feel stifling, and you don't want to feel completely trapped and lose that love. I think instead, dip your toes in the water. Go check out your local charity shop, thrift shop, op shop, whatever you want to call them. We call them op shops here. Check out your local Buy Nothing group, or, local community free swap group. Check out some estate sales.
But that's a really good point. You were saying, like, it doesn't have to be either or. It can be something you can introduce and have fun with it as an option.
Definitely. I'm not strictly not new. Like, as I said, I bought 5 lengths. I don't have any plans on buying new lengths. I really enjoy not buying new fabric.
Yeah, but if something came up, you wouldn't be like, hell no.
Like, yeah, exactly. If, for example, like, I'm lucky enough that I actually managed to get some secondhand denim, but if, for example, I wore through all my jeans and I needed jeans and I hadn't found any denim anywhere, and it was either buy some denim and make myself a nice pair of jeans, or buy a new pair of jeans, I'd probably go ahead and buy like that denim. That's fine. I'm not against. I guess for me, and this is probably the case for most people, we actually have enough clothes.
It's true. Absolutely.
We're not, as you said, people aren't sewing out of necessity to ensure that they are protected against the elements. We have more than sufficient clothes.
Absolutely. Unless there's been like a dramatic weight loss or weight gain or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess in a way that's what got me into sewing in the first place, was body changes and breastfeeding requirements. And so there is definitely some times where you just need clothes, but most of the time we don't need clothes. If we're being honest, like, we have enough clothes. We enjoy making clothes, and this is an enjoyment thing. So don't take the enjoyment out of it, but give it a go. Just go to your charity shop, have a look around, find a piece of fabric you like. We all like going to fabric places and touching fabric. Like, that's what sewers do,
So talk to me about your process then. So the vast majority of your stuff comes specifically from op shops.
Probably about half from op shops. My local, so what we call it here is Buy Nothing. I don't know. It's basically a Facebook group for our local couple of suburbs, so our local area, and people put up things that they want to gift, or people put up requests.
Yeah, so like Free Cycle or Freegal.
Yeah, it's exactly. So there's no exchange of money or goods. Everything is just gifting economy.
They just want them to be kept in use for longer.
Exactly, and you can request things if you really need something. So I actually put a request out for an overlocker, because I was I'm really, and someone had one.
That's so good. You're like, I'm putting this out into the universe.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's such a lovely little community, and we gift to them too, it worked. But so I get some lengths of fabric from there. I have friends who know that I like sewing, so when I had a friend, I made a Gilbert top that was white and kind of beige striped, and that was my friend's old linen sheet. It was like a fitted top sheet, and they'd worn through the middle, and the middle was like torn and see-through. But often on fitted top sheets, the edges is really good condition, because no one sleeps on the very edge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And because it wraps around the mattress, those edges are just not worn. So they're really good. So if you take the elastic out, you get quite a fair bit of fabric there. Op shops, Buy Nothing, friends, my own sheets when they wear out, just anything really. Yeah.
So do you have some happy hunting grounds in your local kind of op shops? Because in the UK, we don't often have fabric in our charity shops, which is super
annoying. I remember when I lived there, your charity shops were quite small compared to ours.
Everything is quite small.
Everything is small. Yeah, exactly. So I just If I happen to have time and I'm around, I go in there. I also, most of my husband's clothes, like all my jeans, because I haven't sewn jeans yet. I really want to, but I haven't yet. And all my kids' clothes come from op shops and like our crockery and all that kind of stuff. So we go in anyway. We regularly go in. Kids grow all the time. So I always just check out the fabric and yarn while I'm there.
So what do you decide? How do you decide what comes home with you and what stays? Like, do you have a criteria or?
I guess it's Marie Kondo style, but opposite. Does it spark joy? And if so, it's coming home.
Nice. Opposite Marie Kondo. Yeah, so I think that's a really good approach to take that fabric first. If you're somebody that has a large fabric stash and you want to get used to using it more, not necessarily being like, right, I've got this pattern. I mean, obviously one way of approaching it is I've got a pattern. Let me see what I've got in my stash first before I go to the fabric shop. Or you could do what you do as well, as in like, right, well, I've got this bit of fabric. It's been there for 3 years. Why haven't I made it yet? What can it be?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. I think shopping your stash falls into the exact same, it's already an existing piece of fabric. And maybe that's a great way because people might feel a little bit more attached to that fabric than the dauntingness of going out and getting secondhand.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is you have to, because it's fabric first, you have to have, I guess, the privilege to have a bit of space to store some fabric.
Yes.
Because I'm basically opportunistic. If I see something I think I will want and use, I buy it.
You have to, yeah.
You have to, because then what I do is then I'll be like, I'm inspired to make a button-up top or overalls or something from this piece of fabric. So every now and then I'll just like look at my fabric stash, which I'm sure everyone does regardless of where it's sourced from. You kind of touch it and enjoy it. And you look at it and then I pull bits out and I go, this is what's speaking to me now. And I usually cut out about 3 or 4 projects at once because I hate cutting.
Oh, do you? I love that bit. But I guess as well, when you're naturally going to have a bit more of a stash, or things are going to sit around for a little bit, because when you do work from the fabric first angle, you kind of sometimes have to let those ideas kind of percolate a bit, don't you? It's not instant in the same way if you specifically went to buy for that blouse or for that jeans project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you can be a lot more minimalist if you're not going secondhand. And I think that is not just for sewing. I think that's for things like clothing, children and things as well. So we have a few tubs of clothes for our kids as they grow, because as we've been op shopping, or people have given us hand-me-downs and things. I love hand-me-downs.
Me too.
I'm not going to say no.
Yeah, because you know at one point they will need a coat, and you know at that point they will need some shoes, and at that point they will need like a waterproof.
Exactly. So minimalism and secondhand, unless you have the extreme privilege of not having a job, not having any other responsibilities, and can, you know, as soon as your child needs something, go trawl 50 different op shops to find, you know, a pair of shorts for them and 2 t-shirts because they've gone up a size or whatever. You have to have stuff.
Yeah.
Like you just can't not have stuff.
Absolutely.
It makes it much easier to be secondhand if you have stuff around, and that goes for sewing, that goes for clothing and things. So
absolutely. So what I really like about your post on Instagram, where you do the captions and you list the sources of the materials of your projects, but also the machinery or tools or equipment that you use as well. I love the way it's kind of like you're promoting the use of secondhand items, but it's not in a judgy way. It's more like, this is what I've done and this is how I source these things. And I love how, you're like modeling it. How did you kind of arrive at that? Why did you decide to kind of disclose the sources of your equipment and your tools as well?
I think it's what brings me joy. So I get a lot of joy from using secondhand tools as well and equipment, as well as fabrics and notions and things. And I don't want to hide that because it gives me joy. And I also think that, I guess, being a woman in STEM, I found representation really important. So seeing people who look like me do things that I think I can do as in be scientists. And I feel like that's applicable to everything. So it would be really hard to start using secondhand if you didn't see people using secondhand already. You know, that's what inspired me to jump on and have a go at sewing a skirt, was because I saw someone else do it with secondhand materials, and that's kind of what set me off on that journey. And I guess, yeah, it's a source of joy, so why not share that?
I love that. I love that so much. And I could talk to you forever, but I'm very aware that it's very late in your evening. That was such a beautiful full circle thing. So I think we'll leave it there. Can you please let people know where we can find you and we can see your work?
So I'm on Instagram at Fibre and Space, and you can also find my website at fibreandspace.com. And I'm on Twitter at Geoplaneteer, but all the links to my socials are on fibreandspace.com. So you can find me through there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. It was absolutely wonderful. And I'm halfway through your just dropped episode, so now I can go back to sewing and listening to the rest of that.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!